welcome to episode 9 of the Aha Moment podcast. My name is Amanda Kaczurka. I'm here with Jeannine and Amber, who are going to be our lovely guests today, and we are talking all things candidate experience. So before we dive into the content and talking a little bit about what our aha moment is for today, I'd love for the two of you to introduce yourselves. So Amber, why don't you go first?
Sure, yeah. My name's Amber Till. I am the Director of Communications at Northwestern Electric Cooperative, and I've been in that role for almost 6 weeks. Before that, I was the executive director of a small nonprofit in the Erie region.
Awesome. Thank you. Jeannine.
And I'm Jeannine Stearns. I'm the HR director for Eriez USA. And I relocated to the Erie area from Philadelphia. And I've been here since November. So just over 6 months.
Wonderful. Thank you. Great to have you both. And so full disclosure, I think, both of the positions that Jeannine and Amber occupy now were positions that the organizations hired decision associates to recruit for. So very involved with both of you with your hiring processes. So we're excited to talk a little bit more about your perspective of the candidate experience. And this is a topic that we're very passionate about as we do recruitment. We work with lots of different candidates for lots of different positions from all over the country. And so we really focus on providing a top-notch candidate experience because we know how important it is. You're assessing the organization and the position just as much as they're assessing you. Mm-hmm. So we think it's important to provide that candidate experience perspective so organizations can understand why it's so important. So today's aha moment is we would like you to reflect on some aha moments that you've had, whether through the process that got you to the positions where you are today, or previous hiring processes, things that really stood out that made a difference. Could be positive, could be negative. So that's what we're interested in hearing about today. So to kick things off, let's talk a little bit about some past experiences. So what have some of your past hiring experiences, you can include this one certainly, what have those looked like? What's really stood out to you?
So one of my past hiring experiences that I really appreciated was I was interviewing with a board of directors for a position, and it was in a weird location. I wasn't really sure how to get into the building or anything like that. And so one of the people that was interviewing me actually met me in the parking lot and walked me in.
Okay.
Right. And so that made me feel more comfortable.
Mm-hmm.
Right. It helped me understand that, first of all, they valued my time,
sure,
because they made sure that we started right on time,
mm-hmm.
but also that they were concerned about whether or not I would feel weird, and anxiety about getting into the building. And that's something that also happened in this hiring process. Elizabeth met me in the parking lot,
mm-hmm.
And actually told me to wait for her to help me figure out how to navigate to the arrival situation. Yeah,
that's great, because I think, and that's something it's a small detail, but really makes a difference when you're coming to an organization that maybe has, a really complex layout or multiple buildings. We have clients who have multiple buildings on one site. So it's like, where do I go? What door do I go to? How do I get there? So yeah, it's great. How about you, Jeannine?
Yeah, so I've been on both sides of the recruiting table. And so I would say that, I'm always very conscious of the experience of the candidate, because I agree that they're assessing us at the same time we're assessing them. I think for myself personally, some of the experiences I've had are where maybe the hiring team doesn't really understand what the HR business partner is. And so it becomes very much a transactional discussion. So it's about do you know the various pieces of maybe operational side of HR?
Sure.
And, when I always try to introduce ideas around, helping the business to achieve their strategy through their people. And,
mm-hmm.
and, in some cases they aren't, familiar with that model.
Yeah.
In other cases, like with Eriez, certainly, the general manager that I was interviewing with and work for now, was very much aware
mm-hmm.
of what he wanted as far as someone that could come in and be a change agent and introduce these concepts.
Mm-hmm.
To the team. I think sort of conversely, when you talk about arrival, I remember the last position when I was in the Philly area, they where it was located, it was in a residential area, but it was a business park.
Okay.
And they had renumbered the buildings.
Oh no.
And Google Maps and Uber had no idea.
Oh no.
And I always leave early because that's just my personality. I make sure I'm like there half an hour in advance.
Yeah.
And I got to the point where we didn't know where this building was.
Right.
And I thought that would have been a really helpful thing to say. Uber doesn't know.
Yeah.
So when you get here, this is where you go. But, and so I thought that was something that I was certainly more conscious of then when I started working there, that I was very detailed when people came to visit, or
certainly
that, this is, tell the Uber driver to take you here.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I do think that, that just starts, you start off anxious.
Right.
That's not a good starting point.
Yeah. And then they're not going to get, the interview team is not going to get the best version of you because you're focused on right place, right time, like very basic.
Right. Absolutely.
So it makes a difference. And I think a lot of times it's easy to get caught up in the actual interview itself. And, are we prepared? Do we have copies of the resume? And do we have, everything that we need as the interview team for the actual interview? But the stuff that happens before that matters so much and can really positively or negatively impact a candidate's experience with that interaction, which is, potentially the first time they're meeting you in person. So don't forget about, for the listeners, do not forget about that, experience of getting to your facility, getting into the building, finding the right place, and making sure that they're where they need to go.
Yeah.
What else? Is there anything else that you'd like to share that stood out through various interview or hiring processes you've gone through?
Right. So for me, I had two sides of the coin. I had the one of, and I was the same. I was looking for jobs, right? So it was the same type of, same timeline for me. And so the first one met me in the parking lot, told me how to get into the building. Very, very kind. Mm-hmm. Second one, I showed up on time for my interview. There wasn't a person at a front desk. The interview was just, you walked in the door and that's where it was happening.
Okay.
And I walked in on somebody else's interview.
Oh no. Oh my gosh.
And then they asked me to stay outside until they were done. And
outside.
Outdoors. Okay. And I was out there for 45 minutes.
Oh,
right? So, and it was summertime, it was hot.
Yeah.
And I'm carrying my stuff around.
Right.
Not really sure what to do. And so, there certainly is, that thought process of, first of all, make sure that your candidates know that you're valuing their time.
Right.
Get a hold of them. If you're running late, tell them so that they know, right? Just making sure that they know that if they do take the position that they're interviewing for, that they're going to be respected. Mm-hmm. Because I was like, what am I doing here?
Right.
Right. And so that was something that really stood out to me as well.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And Jeannine, I think this is something that you, working in human resources really have an understanding of, especially, is the importance of the reflection of your core values in the experience that you give your candidates. Mm-hmm. If you are, and we've talked before with clients, I think we probably mentioned it on episodes too, secret shopping your hiring process to understand where the issues lie and where you're not reflecting those core values and you're not giving a great experience to your candidates. How about you, Jeannine? Anything else that stands out?
I would say, so years ago, one of the companies I worked for, they used to have a process where they would bring a candidate in and the HR manager and hiring manager would interview. And then if they decided, yeah, we're good with this, they would then move on.
Okay.
And I stopped that because I said, from a valuing the time perspective, that candidate has no idea how long they're going to be there.
Right.
They could be there for an hour. They could be there all day.
Right.
And so I eliminated that step and said, no, hiring manager does a phone screen.
Yeah.
And makes a decision on whether or not a candidate comes in. And then that candidate has the full interview, unless, of course, they self-destruct and you sure. I'm not sure. But otherwise, people have to know. And because I remember years ago when I first went back to work, after my daughter was born, I had, a babysitter. I had a friend that was watching her, and I didn't know how long the interview would be. And it ended up being like several hours.
Oh my gosh.
And I had not prepared my friend to take care of my kids that long.
Yeah.
And so it was like, I came out of that. And again, it was just, I think they were doing the same thing. I think they'd bring you in, and if they liked you, they'd keep you there, to interview more. Yeah. But if they didn't, they would cut you loose. Well, for somebody who is taking time off of work,
Yeah.
children that need a babysitter. I just thought that was really disrespectful because
Absolutely.
how would I know what to
Right.
tell this woman? And unfortunately, my daughter had horrible separation anxiety, so it was like that's traumatic for everyone involved.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. And I think it goes to that element of setting and managing expectations for the candidate, and looking through the lens of understanding that this person is, very likely working another job, or if they're not, they have responsibilities at home. They're a whole person, right? They're not just the person that walks through the door and is there from 9 to 5 every day. It's the whole person. And so showing acknowledgement that you recognize that and respect that, and setting and managing their expectations of like, look, here's, the itinerary for the day. Here's how we're going to be spending our time. Communicating that ahead of time is so, so important.
Yeah.
So now I'd like to hear a little bit about, things, and Jeannine, again, with your background in human resources, and Amber, I think your experience hiring people for your teams that you've worked on. What are those things that you've really tried to do to make a difference in the process for the candidates that you've worked with?
I think giving them a sense of where, what the company is like, what the culture is like, what their job will be. I think sometimes there's cases where maybe they don't have a really good idea about what it is that they're looking at. The environment. So again, another example, I had situations where we had 2 different buildings, and the interviews were usually held in the newer, nicer building.
Yeah.
But most of the jobs were in the other building that wasn't so nice.
Yeah.
And so we had a lot of, people would interview, they'd be very impressed with the newer, fancier building. And then when they were hired and they were reporting for their first day, they realized they were in a different building that was quite old and, kind of run down. And it was sort of, there was this impression that it was like a bait and switch. Well, it was just convenient, and there were more conference rooms in the nicer building. And so I said, no, people have to know what their work environment's going to be.
Right.
Like if I'm not working in this building, at least give a tour of where I'll be working to see the environment. I think with the process that I went through with Decision Associates, I think there was a real emphasis on would I fit in Erie, and not just in the company, but like what were the things I like to do, and whether I was, like the community of Erie would be right for me. And I thought that was really important, because when you're moving someone, you definitely want them to understand like what's the environment that they're coming into. And certainly I felt like there was a lot of emphasis on that, which surprised me at first, but then, I appreciated it because I thought it was really helpful to get an understanding of the area, what there is to do here, and what to expect. So that I think is really important too when you're putting the kind of money in for relocation. Absolutely. It's important that the person stays.
Yes, very much so. Yeah, the making sure that there's a good alignment with not just the candidate, but if there's any family members who are going to be traveling and relocating with them, making sure that they're comfortable in the community and can see themselves, living here. That's a really great point. It's an important part of the process for sure.
I would always try and make sure that the people who we were interviewing could meet the team that they were going to be working with.
Yeah.
That was something that I greatly appreciated too about the process with Decision Associates, is that I got to meet the people that I'd be working for, some of the people that were my coworkers, and then also, and very, very important for me, meeting my direct report ahead of time so that I could get to know her and she could get to know me a little bit. I think that knowing who you're going to work with is so important, because the people that you work with every single day, particularly if you're in a leadership position, really, they impact your life.
Definitely.
And so in the past, I've been through hiring processes where maybe it's a leadership position, you work with a board of directors, you are interviewed just by that board, and you don't meet anybody on the team.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden you're bringing in this new leader, and they just don't work.
Yeah.
Right. And that's a big mistake that can really impact.
It is, for sure. And I think especially in that situation where you're interviewing with the board, the board is made up usually a majority of people who don't work for the organization.
Right, yeah.
So they don't have a good sense of the day-to-day culture.
Yeah.
So you're completely missing a really important aspect of allowing the candidate to assess, is this the right place for me? Because you're not giving them that glimpse into the culture.
Right.
And this is something that is, occasionally we'll get some pushback from clients on the point about meeting, especially direct reports.
Mm-hmm.
That's not to say that they are, having a ton of hiring authority
Right.
in the process, but it is important to gather their feedback and make sure that there's good, meshing
Mm-hmm.
with the personalities between somebody who's going to be coming in as their supervisor. So how we typically structure it is as like a meet and greet. We don't call it an interview, we call it a meet and greet. It's an opportunity for them to sit down with the team and get to know people and see if there's a good alignment, because to your point, this is the person that's going to be supervising them. So there needs to be a good relationship and, building a foundation of trust. And when you've got somebody that's been hired and is coming in on their first day, you've never met them, you're not setting the foundation for building trust, right? So,
Yeah. And I think it's really important to, in my case, I knew that someone on my team had posted for the job. And so I came in with that awareness.
yes.
And, in other cases, I wasn't made aware of the fact that somebody on the team had posted.
Oh, gosh.
And it started off the relationship really difficult because I'm working with someone who thinks they should have my job.
Right.
And so I think that, being aware, being conscious of what's the history. And so I think with the decision associates with the process, I got a lot of the backstory. Who was my predecessor? What was what was that situation? What was going on within the team? And that was just really critical. So in my approach then with that person, I could make sure that I was being sensitive to the fact that, not to prove myself to them, but to really to acknowledge that they had posted for the position as well and didn't get it.
Yeah.
And so I think it's just really critical. Otherwise, you walk in and you're blindsided by somebody who's probably disappointed,
Right.
that they didn't get the job.
Yeah, exactly. I think it just, it goes back to setting that foundation of trust and respect for the team, making them realize that they're an important part of this process. And, even if they're not the ones that have the final say on who gets the job, that they're involved and they get to ask questions and assess, fit from their own perspective. Is this somebody I can really, envision myself working for? Definitely. So there's a ripple effect, right, with a hiring process. That's kind of the entry, right, to a new position. And so there's that first kind of crucial 90 to 100 days where you're getting settled. You've got a million different things coming at you from all directions. You're trying to get your footing. So talk to me a little bit about your experiences with that kind of like pre-boarding, onboarding process and how that's worked for you in the past.
I think the pre-boarding, it's really important to keep in contact, especially if there's a big gap between when the person accepts and when they start, just to keep them engaged. In the past, I had a boss who wanted me to start working before I actually started working, but was sending me a lot of information about the company and what was going on. And I actually appreciated that because I felt like I came in with at least more knowledge than I would have otherwise.
Sure.
So I think that's an important piece of it. Making sure, again, when somebody's relocating, do they have they made their arrangements? Do they need any help with that process? And because I've been through both sides, again, where I've relocated employees and I've also relocated several times myself.
Sure.
There are things that I just remember, like the first time I relocated, I had 2 young children. My daughter was very young, and the company. There was a point during the relocation where they called me as the trailing spouse to make sure that I was okay. Yeah. They offered outplacement to me so that I could go and look for a job when I got to knowing that I,
sure.
parent. And then the last thing that they did that I thought was so impressive was that we were allowed as the final relocation expense to submit dinner for the family out.
Oh,
And that was just such a nice touch.
yeah.
That I was super impressed by the outplacement and by that family dinner at the end.
Yeah.
Because I felt like that was really critical, and they understood that if the family's not happy, if the spouse isn't happy,
It's not going to work.
it's not going to work,
Nope.
and the person's not going to end up staying longer term.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's really important to keep in contact with
Yes.
the other, if there's a spouse or a partner with that person,
Yes.
so
absolutely.
that you're certain everything is being served, and the employee is able to manage that. And I found that was something that just stuck with me over the years, and I've done it myself then in integrating that into a relocation program, because I just felt like it was such a nice touch. Very simple, very easy, but a really nice touch.
We call those magic moments.
Yes.
Here at DA. That's something, that's a great example of one. I think there's a lot to be said for doing some preparation before a new hire comes on board with, like, for example, we have a questionnaire that we provide to clients that they can send to their new hire that just gets a sense of a few different things. Everything from, do you prefer coffee or tea? How do you take it? How do you like to be rewarded for a job well done? What are some of your favorite places to go out to eat or go shopping? And then some, more job specific things as far as how do you prefer to start and end your days? How do you prefer to give and receive feedback? Things like that can really make sure that the relationship gets off on the right foot. But then when you collected that information, you can create, and I had it here on my first day with Decision Associates. I came in, and at my cubicle, there was a couple of gifts and some of my favorite snacks. Like popcorn is my favorite. And so there was, a couple different flavors of popcorn from a local popcorn shop. And it just really, it was a little thing, but it showed me that they really cared and took the time to learn a little bit about me and do their homework. And those magic moments, they make a difference for sure. How about you, Amber?
My pre-boarding was particularly important because I had a long gap between when I was leaving my last job until, when I had to give notice.
Right.
I was under contract. I had to give 45 days notice. And then we built in a little bit of time so that I could have some time off in between. But I also, just due to time, not intentionally, had to go on a business trip my second day of work.
Right.
And I was away and not a surprise. And then my second week, I was at a week-long national conference. So it was really helpful to get all of that information figured out ahead of time.
Yes.
Little things like, what do I wear? How do we dress for this event? Right. Just to make sure that I wasn't surprised. Right. And that I was able to prepare myself not only mentally, but also physically for some of it, right? It's been a long time since I've traveled. I needed to replace my luggage, right?
Yeah.
Little things like that, but still making sure that you know what to expect when you walk in the door. And I'll say that the questionnaire that I filled out, it came to me on a very, very stressful day at the job I was leaving, and I used it as a moment for a little bit of a break. It was a nice mental break. It was an easy thing to do, and it really made me feel valued. And the team at Northwestern REC made sure that I had a flower mouse pad because I said I liked gardening and flowers, right? Little things like that. It was just really sweet. Yeah, absolutely.
It does. It starts you off with good, positive feelings, and really sets you off on the right foot for having a productive, first few days. Yep. And I think there's also an element, and we talk about this with clients all the time, where, are there things that are part of the typical first day that can be done ahead of time? Are there forms that can be filled out ahead of time so they're not spending their entire first day, sitting in a room just filling out paperwork? Like, how do we, make that first day a really positive and impactful experience? And that's another thing that we always recommend, is sending out an agenda, an itinerary of how that person's going to be spending their first day or two. So they're not coming in thinking, I'm sure we've all had first day experiences where you come in and you're like, what do I do? I'm just sitting here. I don't understand what, it just kind of feels like they weren't prepared. They knew you were coming, but yet they weren't prepared. Yeah. So when there's purpose behind it, I think that matters.
Yeah. And I think simple things like, am I going out for lunch?
Yeah. Right.
Or should I bring a lunch?
So, yeah.
So it's, I think that's also another piece is having that that agenda and that plan of what's going to happen the first week.
Absolutely.
I think recently what we've done as a company is we do have 2 separate buildings in Erie, and we have started with our onboarding where it's now 2 days.
Oh, nice.
And we do have some things that can't be done in advance that are, kind of drudgery, but we're interspersing that with presentations by our sales team, presentations by our R&D team, very comprehensive tours of both buildings. And it's received a lot of positive feedback because people appreciate the fact that even though I'm going to be working in one building, it's good to see the other building, just understand what goes on there and meet some of the people that work there. Yeah. So I think there's definitely for being prepared of what to expect and, what time do I need to be there? What's going to happen? And I think also, of course, we have to be really sensitive about people's dietary requirements.
Absolutely.
And make sure that that's been captured. So if there is a lunch provided, what they're looking to have.
Yes.
So I think definitely day one. Well, to me, day one is when the person makes a decision about whether they're going to stay.
Absolutely.
Because if day one goes poorly, generally they're like, yeah, I don't think I'm going to stay long.
It's going to be a short stay. Yeah, absolutely. And Amber, I think this is actually an area where your background is really helpful, from a marketing perspective, especially. This is where, if you have a marketing person or marketing team, you can lean on them to help make that experience extra special. So talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, I think, making sure that they learn quickly about the brand, right? But even like going back to day one, making sure they know where to park, get into the building, little things like that are really important too, because at the end of the day, if they don't have a good experience, they're going to go back and talk to other people.
Yeah.
And then that's going to impact your reputation as not just as a place to work, but also as an organization. And so we always have to think about what impression we're giving, right? All of the time, no matter if it's a new candidate or a new hire, right? And so we certainly try to think about that as well. And then one thing that I got when I started at Northwestern REC, which I thought was really, really sweet, was a bag full of branded merchandise.
Yeah.
Things that they give out at their different events. But it was nice to be like, here, welcome, right? They made sure I got a piece of branded clothing my first day. So because obviously I'm traveling immediately. I needed to be able to represent them in some way, but also just to make sure that I felt like I was part of the team. And then it was a sweatshirt, right? I was wearing it the next day and everybody was like, oh, hey, I like your sweatshirt. Yeah. And so that was really sweet too. But just making sure that, they're comfortable. Yeah. Right. And it's so essential because if you go home at the end of the day and say, man, I don't know about this. And then you call your friend and your mom and your old coworker, all of a sudden it's that ripple effect, right? It's that ripple effect. And then all of a sudden everybody knows that maybe it's not the best place to work.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a reflection on the brand.
Yep, absolutely.
The organization. Yeah. So just because it's not, I think sometimes the marketing to candidates and even current employees, honestly, through your employer brand, sometimes that piece gets lost because the marketing focus is so, on your customers, on your clients, whoever, that employer brand piece gets lost. And it's a really important one. Absolutely. I'd like to talk, and I think we've given some really great little nuggets of information throughout the episode, but I'd like to have some focused conversation around some next steps, some things that if somebody's listening to this episode and thinking, gosh, I'm not sure we're providing the best candidate experience we possibly could be. What, from your perspective, are some of the first steps that they could take?
I think definitely talking to new hires. So when we changed our program, it happened to coincide with the start of our internship program. We have 10 interns this summer. So we ran the program. We let them know at the beginning that this is new. It's different. We're doing 2 days instead of one. We had 3 interns that were returning to us. And so I asked them to think specifically about the differences between their first onboarding experience and this one. And then about 2 weeks after they started, I pulled them all together and we had kind of a focus group session to say, what did you think? What worked well? What do you think needs to be improved? How did you like it? And that was really essential in getting the feedback. And we talked about the pre-onboarding because we recently automated that. So it all goes out by email and it's an electronic system. And so I was asking them about their experience with that, and all of the kind of pre-onboarding emails and communications that came out.
Sure.
But it was just a good way to get that kind of feedback. So I think definitely talking to people that have recently started is important.
Yeah, that's a great tip.
Yeah, and for me, it's looking through someone else's lens. And I guess we do that a lot in marketing communications, but try to look at your process through the candidate's eyes and see how you would feel as you go through it. Right. But also, yeah, getting that feedback. One thing that I thought was really helpful, and I do have a little bit of experience with HR and hiring, but the HR director did come to me and say, is there any feedback you have for the new hire experience? We have some new folks that we're interviewing right now. Is there anything you would change? And so that was really helpful because it made me feel like I was valued, right? She was interested in what I had to say, but also that we can help improve moving forward and making sure.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And one thing we talk a lot about here at Decision Associates is making sure that asking for feedback isn't just an exercise in futility, right? It's you actually do something with the feedback that you receive, and you're taking that information, making some changes, taking a hard look at your process and saying, where can we implement, hey, we're getting this feedback consistently. Clearly, this is something that we need to take action on. How do we go about doing that? I think that's even more to show that you're listening and you care and you apply the feedback that you receive, because, especially if you do employee surveys, things like that, there's no better time to demonstrate how we take feedback and we actually do something with it. And I think, just to add my own last piece, I'm really big, I talk about it all the time, really big on setting and managing expectations, being open and honest from the very first step in the hiring process of what the rest of the process looks like. So you're not, it's not this like big mystery of how many interviews are there going to be? How many people am I talking to? Am I going to be expected to do some kind of presentation or something? What's going to be expected of me as a candidate as I go through this process? Providing clear itineraries and calendar invitations and all of that, so your candidates can appropriately manage their schedule outside of work and with if they're currently employed wherever they're currently working. So you're not asking them to just, we'll let you know, follow along. Well, let's be clear about what the expectations are.
I greatly appreciated that through the process, knowing you're going to hear back within the next so many days. And even if it's not the response that you're hoping for, at least when you're going to hear back.
Yes.
And I think what Brene Brown tells us, clear is kind, right? It's just being clear and honest.
Yep.
And maybe not worrying so much about being nice, but being kind to people.
Yeah.
Process.
Actually, great. That's a great point. It's that setting and managing expectations. Just be respectful.
Absolutely.
It's humor.
Yeah.
I think the thing I appreciated most about this process was it was extremely flexible, and so I wasn't working at the time, and so there was the expectation around the timeline was actually quite long from my perspective.
Yes,
but as it turned out, people had availability much sooner, and so we were able to work through getting that interview process, I think, very much accelerated.
Yes,
which I greatly appreciated at the time, since I wasn't working.
Yeah, right.
I wanted to be working. But that was something that I really liked about the process. I also liked the checkpoints. So we had the 30, 60, 90 checkpoints. I thought that was really helpful to allow us time to reflect. So that was me and my boss. And I just enjoyed that as, part of the process. While he and I work very closely together, it was a good time to sit back and say, what's going well, what's not going well? Is there anything that we need to do differently? And I think that's really helpful, especially when you're in a senior role in a leadership position, to have that time to sort of just pause and make sure we're all aligned and what they're expecting from me, I'm giving them.
Yeah, absolutely. Don't give the space for, small missteps or issues to become massive problems that then can't be overcome. And then you run the risk of, losing your new hire much faster. So, well, thank you both. great episode. We really appreciate you taking some time to sit with us and chat about your experiences as candidates, and also I think the unique perspective that you both bring as, working in human resources, Jeannine, and in marketing communications, Amber. So thank you both for being with us today. This has been episode 9 of the AHA Moment. So we're coming up on that 10th episode, which is super exciting. So thank you so much for joining us. You can follow us on LinkedIn. We're Decision Associates. Our website is decisionassociates.net. You can also subscribe to the podcast, which we would love it if you would do that. You can do that on Spotify. And we will look forward to seeing you next time for our 10th episode. So round of applause, ladies. Nicely done. Good work. Thank you very much.
Thank you.